Again, welcome everyone. My name is Nada. I'm with the KHDA Wellbeing team, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. As we wait for everyone to come on board, I would like to invite you to log on to menti.com and enter the code 667 6926. And yes, thank you very much. Please remember to mute yourselves on entry. So hopefully you've been able to log on to menti.com and enter in that code. And I'm really curious to know who is with us today. I'd love to know in which area within your school you work in mostly. Are you part of the Wellbeing Pastoral Care team? Are you a teacher, assistant teacher, or someone that teaches at school? Do you belong in the school leadership team? Or you may be a parent or a student that's interested in today's topic, which will be about contentment. Or do you not belong to any of those categories? Would love to hear who is with us today. As you do that, again, I'd like to welcome you to our workshops for 2021. I know it's been a tough time for many people here and around the world, and particularly in India at the moment. So sending prayers to everyone there right now. Okay. Okay, so most people we have today with us are part of the wellbeing team. Please do not forget to mute yourselves. Okay, I'd like to ask another question of you today. Do you prioritize your well-being over others? Yes, I take enough time for myself. No, I take care of others first, or I'm not quite sure. And I'd love to know as well, once you've done that, who attended one of the workshops from yesterday? Just let us know using one of the team's hearts or a thumbs up if you went to a session yesterday. And I'd just love to share with you what I took away from Dr. Serwa's presentation from yesterday. She spoke about micro practices, such as deliberately thinking about the best moment of the day and finding those micro moments of goodness. I really found that a powerful message. So over the next 2 weeks, we look forward to bringing workshops on wellbeing topics to the education community, brought to us by a mixture of international and local wellbeing experts who have graciously offered their time to share their knowledge and experience in wellbeing and to help you all further with your efforts in supporting a flourishing education community. So we're really blessed today to be joined by Naveen, who is from the Contentment Foundation. Yes, please remember just to mute yourselves, everyone. Thank you so much.
هاي مشغلين، هاي موجودين، هاي الصباح، هاي مدرستنا ما شاء الله.
Ladies, please turn off your microphones.
فيديو
سكرت أنا، تفتحي معه عن طريقي.
اقفلي المايك يا مس اسماء.
Miss Nada, you're also muted.
Okay, I'm back. Great, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. You may recall, as part of the 2020 Dubai Student Wellbeing Census, we actually included some pilot questions on contentment. And our presenter today, Naveen Amir Surya, offers us a conversation on contentment, mindfulness practices, and will share his own journey in well-being. So Naveen oversees international operations and the expansion for the Contentment Foundation. His main responsibilities are to oversee the growth of the 4 pillars of well-being across Bhutan, New Zealand, Indonesia, Brazil, Singapore, and the Middle East. This includes the cross-cultural adaptation of the curriculum, cultivating strategic partnerships, and developing new sources of revenue to serve educators and students around the world. So a very, very warm welcome to Naveen. Thank you so much for joining us, Naveen. And I think you're joining us from Singapore at the moment, but I'll pass over to you. And there's a little a graphic representation of how people feel about their own well-being. And over to you, Naveen. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Hello from Singapore. I'm Nav from the Contentment Foundation, as Nada mentioned, and these results are quite fascinating as we kind of look at how about half the group really is not very sure of how they prioritize their well-being and care for themselves. And education, like the medical field, tends to attract altruistic people. So this conversation around well-being really is about how we balance taking care of others as well as taking care of ourselves. I'd love to start with a story. And by the way, we don't need the screen anymore, so I'll just be talking for the next couple of minutes, and then hopefully we'll have some Q&A sessions after this as well. So a couple of years ago, one of my friends was volunteering at one of Mother Teresa's projects in India. And in this hospital, a very wealthy donor had come by to basically see the hospital that he donated to the foundation. And as this wealthy donor was walking through these new facilities with Mother Teresa, he had a photographer that was following them the whole way, taking photos of the visit. And at the end of the tour, outside the hospital, he wanted to take a really good photo of him and Mother Teresa. So under the hot New Delhi sun, Mother Teresa was being posed by this donor for about 20 minutes for this old lady to get this photo. Now, my friend who was volunteering was watching all this. And at the end of the photo session, when the wealthy man drove away with his entourage, he went to Mother Teresa and said, Mother, I don't think that was necessary. He had so many photos already. Why did you agree to be posed like that? I thought that was very rude of him. And Mother Teresa turned to him and said, my son, poverty comes in many forms. And I think the concept of poverty, we tend to associate with wealth. So there are rich people and poor people. But the idea that I'd like to share with you today is that the psychological effects of poverty can exist in wealthy people. And in the same way, the psychological traits of abundance can exist in people that don't have a lot to give. And really, this is linking to the idea of contentment as well. So there was a very famous piece of research done by the 2002 Nobel Prize winner in Agnes Deaton that basically was trying to question whether money can buy happiness. And some of you may have come across it before. What they did was they took a couple of thousand people in the US and they tried to correlate indexes of well-being. So they had 10 criteria of well-being on a graph compared to how much money you earned. And the graph, if you can imagine it, was actually one that was started very strong. So what they found was if you earned less than 20,000 US dollars, and by the way, the numbers don't matter because this study was done in 2007, so the numbers are outdated, but the principle is important. If you were below the poverty line in the US in 2007, every dollar you earn has a measurable impact on your well-being. Moreover, it has an exponential impact. Between 20,000 to 70,000 or 75,000 US dollars, which was the middle class, every dollar you earn had a positive correlation. There was a one-to-one correlation. But very fascinatingly, after 75,000 US dollars, well-being starts to become flat. And what it means is that if you earn double the salary or quadruple the salary of someone who had hit that mark of well-being, it didn't mean that you were 2 times or 4 times more well. In fact, in Singapore, we are a very wealthy country per capita, but the incidences of mental unrest and mental anguish have been rising steadily over the years, despite the fact that people have become wealthier. So we have to kind of question what is the relationship between material gain and well-being. And going back to the story of Mother Teresa, we are very wealthy. We can also be poor in other types of capital. So if you think about the wealthy businessman that wanted all those photographs, maybe on some level this person was insecure. Maybe this person felt that people would only respect him if he had the right photograph in his office. Or you can see maybe some people that may have materially a lot of wealth, their families are fighting. So it means that in terms of relational capital, it's low. Very often you see people who are in hospital rooms who are having a very serious illness, and they may wish they had taken better care of their health. They may wish that they'd spend more time with their families. So these are all types of capital that they sacrificed in order for their wealth. And one of the big challenges is, as educators, how do we really build and serve our students and our colleagues with practices of well-being that will ensure that we all live full lives as well. So I think many of you are familiar with the concept of mindfulness. And I think as educators, you understand the importance of cultivating mental health and well-being. But just to rope back to what Nada said, the concept of micro practices or the concept of cultivation is the key to this. So, you may hear me speak for the next couple of minutes, and there may be some interesting tidbits you take from it. But unless these practices are actually practiced, they fall away very, very quickly. A lot of times, we think about things like exercise, where if we commit to exercise over a period of time, we can see the benefits. But you can't expect to go for a single course or a 2-day weekend program and expect to be fit your whole life. It doesn't work that way. And a lot of governments around the world are realizing that as mental health issues arise, the cheapest form or the cheapest way to address this is by helping teachers and students cultivate these practices for themselves. In the world of psychology, there's been a lot of talk around what it means to be happy. And happiness, in a way, is the reason why all of us get up in the morning. I mean, no one wakes up saying, may I suffer the whole day. And when we contribute to our work, when we kind of get our salaries, in some ways, we are trying to maximize the happiness for ourselves and others. But as a famous psychologist, Viktor Frankl, who survived a concentration camp and wrote about that experience, once said, happiness cannot be it has to be a byproduct. And when you think about meaning and when you think about motivation, it's very different to think about work from the point of view of who we can serve as opposed to what we can get. What we can get is very important, but by linking our work to a larger meaning, it can ultimately bring us more fulfillment. And approaching happiness directly is also problematic because there's a psychological phenomena called hedonic adaptation. There was a very famous study, a very unusual study, that compared quadriplegics, that means people who have lost the use of their arms and their legs, with lottery winners. And what they were trying to work out is how happy are lottery winners, a year, 2 years after they win the lottery, and how happy are people who lose their arms and their legs in a car accident or some other tragedy 2 or 3 years later. And what they found was that both the lottery winners and the quadriplegics, over enough time, they would come back to the middle. They would come back to a baseline. Some of you may have experienced this in planes. So let's say when we start economy, we are lucky, and a few times we get upgraded to business class. Now, let's say we only have that experience, or let's say we only travel in cars with air conditioning as opposed to cars with no air conditioning. After a while, the cars with air conditioning become the baseline. The business class becomes the baseline. So that's our standard expectation. So what was once amazing is now just what we accept as normal. And the human psychology has a tendency to take for granted what is amazing around us all the time. And this links a lot to the concept of contentment, because if we can cultivate this way of seeing the beauty of what already exists, we appreciate it more for what it is. And also, we step off that treadmill of constantly wanting more. And when we think about self-improvement, I mean, all of you on this call, I'm sure the fact that you are even spending time out of your busy lives to listen to some random person in Singapore talk about contentment means that you care about self-improvement. But even when you think of self-improvement, there can be an extreme of self-improvement where nothing is ever good enough. And on the other hand, if we never want to improve ourselves, then we just will always stay the way we are, and we cannot change the quality of our lives. So the way to think about self-improvement driven by contentment, it's self-improvement combined with unconditional self-acceptance. And I know what I'm saying now might be confusing because those are two opposite things. But for those of you that play musical instruments, if you've ever played a guitar or a violin, when you start playing a guitar, the first thing a guitarist will do is they'll tune the string. If the string is too tight and you play the string will snap and there'll be no sound. If the string is too loose and you play the chord, there is no sound because there's no tension on the string. So when you think about the chord being too tight, it's always being in a state of self-improvement. It's never enough. And because it's never enough, one day conditions will arise that there'll be a snap. But if we're too loose with our string and we don't care about self-improvement, then we ultimately will cause a lot of suffering to ourselves and the people around us as well. And again, thinking about how to hold these two opposing ideas together is the concept of contentment. And contentment simply means being grateful for what exists. So if we think about all of the teachers, and I'll challenge, let's do an exercise now. If we all just take a moment to sit down and just close our eyes and think of one teacher in your life that has really made a big impact on you. One teacher, and it doesn't have to be from a school, just someone in your life who has given their time, their energy, their care, maybe even a teacher that loved you into being. And as you close your eyes, just imagine the face of this teacher or friend or parent or someone who's really given you a lot. You can just reflect on their generous gift and their love. And now if we take a deep breath and open our eyes, we can get this felt sense that there is a lot to be thankful for and a lot to be grateful for as well. There's a great Stoic quote that comes from the ancient Greeks that we cannot change our circumstances, but we have some agency on how we can see where we are. We have some ability to change the subjective experience of our circumstances. And that is the work of cultivation. So the Contentment Foundation was started 5 years ago in Yale University. Unfortunately, there was a school shooting nearby in Yale in the US, and there was a young psychologist there called Daniel Cordaro, who ended up writing some lesson plans around cultivating practices of well-being for the school. And 5 years later, the organization has grown to 7 countries, and we are a nonprofit whose mission is to spread practices of well-being to students and teachers and parents around the world. And our theory of change actually works a lot with educators and adults. So often as teachers, there's so much that's done to us. There's very little that's done with us. There's always a new lesson plan to do. There's always new reports to write. But really, why I asked the question in the beginning of, do you take care of yourself, is really all of this work begins with how these ideas resonate for our own lives. If they have some benefit for our own lives, use them. If they don't, we don't need to use them. But then you can share it with the people around you as well. And the beauty of the time that we live in is that there's a whole body of scientific literature from behavioral sciences, social sciences, and neurosciences that show the efficacy of training your mind mentally. Just a short story about that is 50 years ago in California, there was a grand total of 3 gyms. And there's no data on how many gyms there were in the US, but maybe there was 10 or 15 gyms that existed in the whole of the continental US. Now, 50 years since the 1960s when Arnold Schwarzenegger was in Venice Beach, there are now thousands, maybe tens of thousands of gyms in the US. And what has changed in the last 50 years is that people have realized the value of exercise for their physical well-being. They've realized the values of physical exercise in their quality of their life, in their relationships, and in their overall health for themselves and their families. So right now we stand at the intersection of the importance of mental health. So in 50 years' time, these ideas around social and emotional learning and cultivating well-being practices will just be a given. We won't have to explain it at all. And going back to the Contentment Foundation, we have a curriculum that takes all of these scientifically evidenced practices and we build it into what we call the 4 pillars of well-being. The first pillar is around mindfulness. And mindfulness, for those who are not familiar, is the ability to cultivate attention and to direct that non-judgmental attention to what's happening inside of us. Some of us who are here might have heard this term called the attention economy. We live in a time where Google, Facebook, and other tech giants are the most valuable companies in the world, worth trillions of dollars. The reason why these companies are so valuable is because they trade in human attention. If I can get you to stay on Instagram for half an hour a day more, my chances of selling you a product or service increases by a certain percentage. And because of that, they can raise money from shareholders. So cultivating attention and the ability to direct attention is a very important skill. And secular mindfulness practice is the way that particularly students who have already very short attention spans can cultivate this muscle. But even for adults, when we cultivate these practices of attention, we can start to choose what brings us well-being and what doesn't. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. The second pillar of well-being is the community pillar. And when you think about the attention that we turn inward to understand our own emotional landscape, once we build that understanding of what it means to be angry or sad or frustrated or stressed, we can start to turn that lens outward and we can start to see that in people around us. Typically, people who have very low scores in empathetic response tend not to be able to understand what it means to feel themselves. And because they can't feel themselves, it's hard for them to see those feelings in others. So the community pillar builds on the work of mindfulness to then cultivate more pro-social behavior by introducing tools to support empathetic training, as well as to expand that into compassion, which is to try and not just connect with the pain of the other, but also try to find some way to support them in their journey to resolve it. The third pillar we have is called self-curiosity. And this is really interesting because all of us on this call, we have the stories we tell ourselves. For some people, they tell themselves, I'm not smart enough. For other people, they tell themselves, I'm not beautiful enough. For other people, they tell themselves, I haven't advanced in my career enough. And the interesting thing is that these are simply stories. Compared to most people in the world, we may be actually very, very well off in these areas. But because of the stories we tell ourselves, we think that it's a reality. And when you think about things like bias, if you've ever experienced discrimination, if you've ever experienced trauma, if someone has hurt you because you were different, this is because on some level they could not see that you had a story, that you were a human being. And if we can start to unpack our own stories, we can start to understand our own pains, our own lessons we've learned in our lives, and we can start to create new stories for ourselves. And that links very beautifully to the last pillar, which is on contentment and balance, which is really about the way we see. As I talk about contentment and balance, this story kind of just arose in my mind spontaneously, and I think that it will support this idea. So there's an old Taoist sage called Lao Tzu. So he wrote a book called the Tao Te Ching, and it's a very famous book in Chinese philosophy. And in the book, he has a short poem about an archer. So the poem goes something like, the archer who shoots for a piece of gold, is shaking because depending on how he releases the arrow, it may hit or miss the target, but he's very nervous. The archer who shoots amongst his friends, so just in fun competition, is also nervous, but more confident to release the arrow. But the archer who shoots for himself, meaning that there's no pressure, he's looking at the target and he just releases the arrow, will always hit his target. So now the objective to hit the target hasn't changed, but the difference is on the side of not wanting anything, just doing the work for the work's sake. It's a very content place to come from. If we're working from a place of scarcity or of lack, if I came to this session, for example, wanting something from each of you, I won't be in a position to give. And because I'm in a position to give, I feel very happy and comfortable to share these ideas in a way where I don't feel particularly nervous. And I feel very honored to be able to connect with you on these concepts. So the last pillar of contentment and balance is about cultivating a different reason for why we do what we do. It's not to say that earning money is bad, or being wealthy is a bad thing. Not at all. It's just that we have to understand what is, and understanding what is enough is a very, very radical idea in a world that constantly says we need more. We can always be wealthier, we can always have a bigger house or a bigger car. So how do we balance these forces? And going back to the ancient Greeks, there's a really great way to test. There's a really great way to test these ideas. So the Greeks had two concepts around well-being. One was called hedonic well-being, and the other one was called eudaimonic well-being. These words have kind of fallen out of flavor in English, but they explain this balance very well. So hedonic well-being, hedonism, some of you are familiar with that term, is the act of consuming and just getting more and more and more. And in old Greek art, you will see that they used to have these banquets where people would get drunk. They would eat and get drunk. They'll vomit and then they'll eat some more. Eudaimonic well-being is the kind of well-being sensation, that felt sense you get when you are teaching them something and they understand it, or you help an old lady cross the street, or you feed an animal that's hungry. And the difference between those two kinds of well-being is that one consumes itself as you use it, and one grows as you use it. So to illustrate this idea further, if let's say we all here were hungry and we wanted pizza, the first slice of pizza would taste delicious. The fifth slice of pizza might taste pretty good because now we're getting full. But let's say now we're having a second pizza and it's a bit uncomfortable because we're already full. And if we have the third pizza, we'll probably vomit because it's so much food. But let's say there was a small bird outside your window and the bird is hungry and you put a little bit of food for the bird and the bird flies away. And maybe two birds come back. And let's say over time you decide to feed the cat on your street, or you decide to feed an elderly lady who maybe does not have enough food. This sort of well-being grows and grows and grows, and you can feed 1,000 people, you can feed 10,000 people, and you will still feel very good. So happiness of consumption, but with this Greek idea of hedonic pleasure and eudaimonic pleasure, we can start to see there are different types of happiness and well-being. And with wisdom and with practice, we can understand that There are some people, behaviors, ideas that we can work with and work on to cultivate eudaimonic well-being, which ultimately leads to more flourishing lives for all of us as well. So that's the 4 pillars of well-being that the Contentment Foundation does. And when we work with a school, we ask the school to appoint a well-being team. And this is very different from a lot of other trainings where it's just a weekend course where you do it once and it ends. I heard a story in Japan, which I really love. There was a friend of mine who was very, very interested in farming. And I asked him, what is your favorite vegetable? And he said, no, Navin, you know, true farmers don't care about what grows. True farmers love just tilling the soil, watering the seeds, making sure the sun grows is out of our control. And I love that idea. Part of cultivating well-being is creating environments in which well-being can be practiced. And that's the key thing. It's a muscle that has to be stretched. It's a muscle that has to be built over time. So when we work with the well-being team in the Contentment Foundation, that well-being team in a school works out a year's plan of integrated ideas on how you can practice some of these concepts, like, for example, gratitude reflection or mindfulness practice, and really build this muscle. And something amazing happens over time. We have studies that we've conducted that demonstrate if an organization is committed to well-being, the job satisfaction increases, and that's kind of obvious, but the employee turnover decreases, the student-teacher relationship improves, and crucially, the parent-teacher relationship improves as well. So with simple instruction and with a bit of practice, when these tools are discovered for oneself, they actually benefit not just your professional life as well as your personal life too. So if there's one idea I'd love for you to take from this session, is that find a well-being practice that works for you. And it can be exercise, but it can be something a little bit more, like maybe take some time to walk in nature or take some time to reflect on all the people that helped you in a given week. These practices really, really have a kind of powerful compounding interest that really change the very nature of our lives. And many, many organizations around the world have realized the power of this, and they continue to kind of help their employees also support it as well. And there continues to be immense research into this field. As we know, we live in the era of coronavirus. And for those of you in India, the Contentment Foundation has team members in India, and we are praying for all of you where we are. But really, even though it's a medical event that has affected millions of people, it's fundamentally a psychological effect that's affected billions of people. In Singapore, there's been an marked increase in youth suicides. So that's kids under the age of 21 who've taken their lives last year. And we are a country that handled the coronavirus pandemic relatively well. So amongst the colleagues you work with, amongst the students you work with, I'd also encourage you to try and find practices of well-being that can be a good psychological support and anchor for the people around you as well. So I want to leave some time for Q&A and just exploration into these topics. I know it was a lot of information in a short time. But I'd just like to leave all of you with the idea that if you're interested in exploring more of our work, you can visit www.contentment.org. And you can see a bit of our curriculum. And my email address is navin@contentment.org. So if you'd like to reach out after this session, the Contentment Foundation is a non-profit, and our mission is really to just serve the well-being of schools around the world as pillars of community. So if there's any way I can help any of you, I'd be happy to. I'd love to shift gears now to the Q&A session, so we can kind of dive into whatever you feel you want to explore a bit further. So Nada, I'll hand it over to you to open the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Vane. That's fantastic. And thank you for being so generous by providing your email. I've added Nav's email to the chat and also the Contentment Foundation web address. You might just want to check that. Nav, is it www.contentment.org, or is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nav, for that beautiful presentation. I really love the stories that you shared. They really helped support your concepts of contentment. There's been a couple of questions, and I do encourage people to post more questions in the chat. So please feel free to do that, or alternatively, just raise your team's hand icon, and you can turn on, and I'll go to you to turn on your microphone, and you can ask the question in person. But we'll start off with this question, Nav. You know, Dubai schools are quite diverse, not just in curriculum, but also in terms of nationality and culture. How do we practically integrate well-being into different cultures?
Mhm. So the Contentment Foundation works in 7 countries around the world. And Daniel, who's the founder and CEO of the foundation, is by training a cross-cultural psychologist. And one of the things I've really learned from him is that we have to start by working and listening to what is already being done. I'll give you an example of that. So we're working with a school in a very rural part of New Zealand. And in this school, it's the population of the school is primarily Maori students. So these are the indigenous people in New Zealand. And they have an existing community practice of sharing the sorrows of the heart. So it's a Maori tradition where all of these people would go around in a circle, and each of them will share the pain in their heart bit by bit. Now, the Contentment Foundation's work obviously has a lot of lessons that link to this, but we never start off from the place that we know better than what is already being done. Our objective is to give the psychological, the social science, and the evidence-based background to support practices as well. So if you think about the word mindfulness, in some cultures, maybe in Dubai, it could be seen as having some kind of religious connotation. So for us, the most important thing is that we understand that all of the tools that we use in our curriculum are secular in nature, number one, and the terminology can change depending on the country we're in. So in some schools in the UK, for example, the word mindfulness is not used. They call it instead cultivating attentional intelligence. So, as I mentioned, mindfulness is about training the muscle of attention. So some people say that there are 3 kinds of intelligences: cognitive intelligence, which we learn from our traditional subjects; emotional intelligence, which social and emotional learning curriculums like the Contentment Foundation's 4 Pillars of Wellbeing do. But then there's also attentional intelligence. And attentional intelligence is basically mindfulness with a different name. So the way that each of these ideas are packaged has to be very sensitive to the semantics and the nature of where these ideas land. And when we work with schools, our coaching representatives spend a lot of time on this cultural adaptation as well. It's very critical.
That's very interesting indeed. Thank you, Nav, for that. I love that, cultivating attentional intelligence. That's wonderful. Okay. Another question, Nav. We often hear from schools that they do not have enough time to invest in well-being. So how do we package it to make it more practical from an operational perspective? Thoughts?
Yeah, this is the most common question that we get, and we can use the same argument for ourselves. We can always say that we don't have enough time to exercise, or we don't have enough time to eat correctly, and that may be true. Maybe our days are so packed that there's really not even 10 minutes to go for a walk. But over time, if this is continued, then our health will suffer, and we might end up in, let's say, a hospital operating room getting a heart bypass. And during that time, we'll be stuck in the hospital, so we'll lose time there. So the thing is, the time in investment can either be made now or later. If we take the steps to maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes of good exercise a day, we could perhaps avoid that eventuality in the future. And part of it is packaging as well. So why the Contentment Foundation focuses a lot on cultivating these practices for ourselves first is that we need to understand the value of this work for ourselves. In in the tech industry in Silicon Valley in about 2007, they were finding that a lot of their top engineers were getting burnt out. And that was sort of the beginning of the secular corporate mindfulness movement. So Google started a program called Search Inside Yourself that really looked at bringing mindfulness practice to engineers. Now, what they found was that when these engineers started to practice mindfulness diligently, the productivity increased, and as well as their overall job satisfaction increased as well. So from an operational point of view, there's an argument to tell a principal that if we really spend time to take care of our teachers, if we took time to take care of all the adults in our schools, we will have more stable school environments that ultimately not just save us time, but save us money and contribute to a much better working environment as well.
Thank you, Naveen. We have a question from Rachel. Thank you, Rachel, for your question. Her question is, some students' attitude is, I can take care, please stay away. But we know they really do need help. In addition, distance learning has made it even more difficult. How do we gain such students' confidence and help them?
Rachel, that's a huge question, and you know, it's one that is complicated because, as you said, you know, distance learning has almost become the norm in many countries. But going back to the fundamental idea that it's very difficult to change other people. Some might say it's impossible to change other people. We can only change ourselves. And you know, Mahatma Gandhi had the beautiful quote: "If we want to change the world, we must first change ourselves." So, as we know from education psychology, most children learn through modeling of behavior, and it's not immediately visible. But in the end, if that student has that attitude, that student is learning that from somewhere, maybe parents, maybe peers. But through modeling behavior over an extended period of time, they will discover some value in it. And going back to packaging as well, with students, we have age-appropriate exercises that they can do to learn about these concepts. So I'll give you an example. We have a curriculum for infants, and for many years it was thought that infants will react to, you know, if we are constantly angry, then we are prisoners of anger. So if we have the ability to just take some time to choose, there is a benefit. Not all students are ready to understand this, of course, but by modeling the behavior ourselves, we have a greater chance in influencing them.
That's some excellent thoughts there, Naveen. Thank you so much. I've got one or two questions left, and I know we're getting close to the hour. Naveen, first of all, thank you so much for this talk. Contentment is often mistaken for lack of ambition. What do you think?
Thank you so much for bringing that up. You know, I live in Singapore, and when I tell my friends I'm in the Contentment Foundation, they think it's a dirty word. You're content? Does that mean you don't want to do anything more? Do you want to sit under a coconut tree for the rest of your life? Well, you know, you can look at it one way, that way. But at the same time, when you really look at people that serve the world, when you really look at, where I live in a block of flats. And outside my block of flats, there's an old lady, a very old lady, who every evening will go and feed some cats. And I watch her sometimes when I go for a walk with my wife. And I found out that this old lady actually most days doesn't have enough to eat for herself, but she's buying cat food. Now, somewhere in this lady, she's decided that she has enough. She doesn't have enough for meals every day, but she has enough to give other people. And the beautiful thing is when you look at people that really inspire, one of the things you notice is that they work very, very hard. And they work very, very hard for sometimes no recognition and for no pay. I'm recalling the story of a man in India who whose wife passed away because his village was 40 minutes away from a hospital. In between his village and the hospital was a mountain. And because they had to go around the mountain to the hospital, but his wife passed away. So this man for 40 years with a hand chisel built a road through the mountain and if you Google this story, it's incredible. He built the road to connect the village to the hospital that reduced that journey to 10 minutes. And so we have to ask, was that man lazy? He worked as a laborer all day, and then he came home at night and literally was cracking this mountain in half over 40 years to build this road. But if, let's say, he wasn't content, let's say that he wanted to just earn more money to build a bigger house, would he still be as driven to do that as he was literally moving a mountain? So contentment can be an incredible fuel to find ways to serve not just ourselves, but the people around us as well. And contentment as well, modern contentment research has shown that the highest performers in the world are generally not motivated by reward. So the best athletes and the best business people, they're not really doing it for the money. They're doing it because they're trying to solve large problems. So in a way, they are materially content, but they are very curious about how they can serve the world as well. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Naf, for that. That's contentment as a fuel to serve. Absolutely. We have one final question. What are some of the well-being practices that have worked for you?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I would recommend everyone to try to explore a bit of secular mindfulness practice. It's the first pillar of what we do, but speaking about myself personally, about 10 years ago, I was working in the luxury goods industry. So I wasn't even in education. I was running operations for a luxury brand. And I met a neuroscientist who was a very brilliant man and who kind of showed me that actually, there's a muscle in my mind and my heart. And if I worked on that muscle, then I would always be able to kind of be well. And he introduced me to secular mindfulness practice. And so there are two apps, Headspace and Calm, that are out there. I mean, all of you have smartphones. You can download either of those apps, and they have exercises that are about 5 minutes a day. And I began doing 1 minute a day of mindfulness meditation, just breathing and all that. And just to share the neuroscience of it, if we can simply relax and concentrate on our breathing for a little while, our parasympathetic nervous system is activated, our blood pressure goes down, our desire to kind of move to the next thing reduces. If I'm speaking to my wife, I can listen to her more. If I'm going for a walk, I can appreciate the sun against my skin. And really, it comes down to that habit. And the meditation apps are actually a very good way to start. I would also say that human beings biologically are designed in a way to always want to do the next thing. I mean, we've all evolved in a way to kind of find the next task to accomplish or the next thing to build. But if we're constantly living in the future, if we're constantly waiting for the next house to come, if we're constantly waiting for our kids to improve in their scores, then even if that future arrives, what will happen is you will get to that future, but you'll never enjoy it because you'll live in the next future. And then you'll find life is this hamster wheel of going to school, going to university, going to work, and then eventually dying without really enjoying the process of life. A musician friend of mine had this beautiful saying, which was, if the point of music was to get to the end of the song, then as a musician, I should play everything very fast. So the point of this journey is not to get to the end. The point of this is to find new ways to enjoy the music. And mindfulness, secular mindfulness practice is a very good practice to do. And one last thing I will add is that when you begin the practice of secular mindfulness, it can seem like you can't do it. I thought I couldn't do it in the beginning because as soon as I get quiet and I try and focus on my breath, my brain lights up with all of the noise of the world. But there's a very good analogy called the monkey mind. So if we think about mind like a crazy monkey that's running, the first thing we need to do is we need to tame the monkey. So by breathing, we start to notice how crazy the monkey is. And we just ask the monkey, can we just focus on our breath for a little while? And then if we can tame the monkey and the monkey's relaxed, we realize we can start to train the monkey. So then we can say, can we focus on gratitude? Can we focus on respectful listening? So now the monkey, from becoming more calm, we can actually train our minds and our hearts to do more. And finally, with years and years of practice, maybe decades, one day we'll be able to transcend the mind, which means that we can actually even be with people in a way that we never thought possible. So when we are with people, we're with people our heart intention. We realize that everything that we've been searching for is actually already inside us. And the question then becomes, how can we serve the world? And this is all completely secular stuff that has been validated by neuroscience and social science. There are plenty of studies that cite these. So if any of you would like to see the scientific literature that this is based on, please let me know as well.
Thank you so much, Nav. We're getting a lot of positive messages coming through on the chat. Really enjoyed listening to your session. Naveen is so well read in his field of study. The stories are so interesting. Thank you so much. Your anecdotes and references are extremely good. What a lovely session. So thank you so much, Nav. And I've just seen one more question, which I'll try and sneak in. Here we go. How can wellbeing practices encourage the online students or the distance students with return back to school when we eventually go back?
Yeah, so here's another kind of a bit of a counterintuitive idea that I'll leave with all of you. As much as I talk about the outcomes of a calm mind or like better emotion regulation, if we start practicing all of these ideas with an end in mind, in a way, it will never work. It's kind of like how, every time there's a new year rolling around, there's huge signups for gyms. Everyone says, I want to get fitter. I want this nice body or whatever. And then 3 months later, the gyms are empty. So what I would encourage is find the motivation of why well-being is important to you. And it's different for different people. Some people, maybe they do it for their families. Some people, they do it because they feel stressed. But find why you want to practice it. And in a way, let the result go. I know I've talked a lot about the good outcomes of this, but by working on your motivation, you have a greater chance to endure. So for example, if you start the new year saying that, I want to get fit so I can go for a walk with my parents, or if I want to get fit to play with my kids, it's different from saying I want to get fit to have a nice body. You're still doing exercise, but you're doing the exercise for a different reason. So find the motivation for your own well-being as much as you can. And I promise you, over time, people will see the difference.
Thank you so much, Nav. That is a wonderful note to leave us with. I'm definitely guilty of, and I think many of us are, of being on the hamster wheel. So thank you so much for reminding us to tame that monkey within us and take a breath now and then. And I really loved, finding that motivation of why you want to improve. Really inspirational. Thank you so much. If you were live with us, you'll hear a huge applause from the audience today. We had over 70 people join us in this session. So thank you so much once again for your generosity, for your time of being with us today. Thank you so much. I know you need to run, but I will just ask for our attendees just to remain on the line with us, as I have a few important announcements to make. So thank you so much, Nav. Have an awesome day, and thank you so much.
Thank you all. Feel free to contact me if you'd like to chat about anything at all. I'm very happy to have spent this time with all of you. So take care.
Thank you so much, Nav. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, and everyone else that's still on the line with us, you'll see that we've got the Menti. So if you can log back onto menti.com and enter the code you see on the screen, 6676926. I think it's really important just to take a few moments to reflect on some of those key messages that Naveen shared with us today and all of his wonderful stories. What are your key takeaways that you may have got from this webinar today? If you can just enter those into the Menti, that would be awesome. I'll just give you a couple of moments to do that. Thank you so much for everyone that's staying on, just for a couple more minutes. Thanks, Zarina, for your comment. Yes, it was a very lovely session, very inspiring one too. And I think with everyone just sharing their personal reflections, we'll be able to capture this, and you'll be able to access this when you review the video, if you so wish. Okay, so someone said focusing on the journey, it's not just the destination. Joy is found not always in finishing an activity, but in doing it. How to tame your monkey mind and channel your thoughts. Absolutely, I took that away as well. Supporting each other to maintain well-being. Cultivation is key. If you do not foster mindfulness, you won't see the benefits. I will surely try to meditate and try to be more calm for my own well-being. It was great self-awareness and refreshment. Headspace and calm apps for mindfulness. The 4 pillars of well-being. Taming the monkey within. Be grateful and thankful that will make you content. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your reflections there. It is very much appreciated. Awesome. Thank you so much. And as we mentioned earlier, this session has been recorded. So if you found it interesting, you're more than welcome to share it with your colleagues at work, with your family members. I noticed someone put in a comment in there that we should share this with our husbands. So for those people out there that think that this presentation could go a long way with family, to share it as well. You'll find a copy of this presentation and the other presentations being presented this week and next week on the New Days, New Ways website, which I will share with you in a moment. This person has put, I will take with me the reminder that wonderful people exist on this planet, and that makes me happy. It's my motivation to do good. Thank you very much, Naveen and the team, for the organization of this session. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all those people that shared their reflections. So this is the website that I was referring to, where you could go and download the recorded sessions, newdaysnewways.hda.gov.ae. There's an English page and an Arabic page as well. Okay, and just finally to leave you with this message, today, this afternoon at 3 p.m. is our next session, and that is being delivered by Dr. Tayyib Rashid, and he will be talking about teaching well-being and practicing it. So please join us for that session this afternoon at 3 p.m. And with that, I bid you all a lovely day, and do take care and be well, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye. Thank you.